When most people think of nirvana, they think of a kind of Buddhist heaven, a place of eternal light, peace, and angels, where an enlightened being goes after they die. But if you look at the early texts, the Buddha explicitly rejects this. Nirvana isn't a place, neither a here nor a there. And yet the Buddha calls it the ultimate bliss. So here's the mystery. How can something be the ultimate bliss if it's not a place, maybe not a feeling, and maybe not even anything at all? Today we're going to try to solve this paradox by looking at the two ways practitioners have understood the ultimate goal of early Buddhism. The inflationary view, that is, that nirvana is a kind of a real thing, and the deflationary view, that nirvana is a kind of an absence, and why the real answer may lie in thinking about an air conditioner. One way to begin our search is to consider the word itself. Nirvana literally means blowing out or extinguishing, like of a fire or of a candle flame. In one early sutta, the Buddha asks Vacchagotta, "This fire in front of you that is extinguished, in what direction did it go? East, south, west, or north?" The answer, of course, is that none of these is correct. The fire didn't go anywhere. It simply ceased because its fuel was used up. This is the deflationary view of nirvana. The implication of this view is that nirvana is not a kind of a place that you go to, nor even a kind of experience that you have. Instead, it's simply the permanent cooling of the fires of greed, hatred, and ignorance. Modern scholars like Bhikkhu Sujato lean this way. That is, that nirvana is best understood as a kind of a via negativa, negative way, an elimination of the unskillful, rather than as a kind of a place that we go to. Now, why is such a view hard for some people to accept? Because it sounds like nihilism. We think, so we just disappear. The counterpoint to the deflationary view is prompted by the question, if nirvana is just a blowing out, why does the Buddha describe it in such positive, majestic terms? For example, he calls it the far shore, the island, the refuge, the deathless element. In contrast to the view that nirvana is a kind of an absence, the inflationary view sees it as a kind of a supramundane presence. In another early sutta, the Buddha describes nirvana as that dimension, tad ayatanam, where certain things happen to be true. Now, the word ayatanam has the general meaning of a resting place, an abode, a source, a region, a sphere, a field, an area, or a dimension. Although, of course, in this case, the Buddha would be using the word as metaphorical for something supramundane, extra-normal. But whatever the case, this passage does suggest that nirvana exists, which implies the inflationary view. That is, that nirvana is a kind of a reality, an unconditioned element that in some sense we touch or enter into. Modern scholars like Bhikkhu Bodhi lean this way. If nirvana were simply a lack, the spiritual path would seem somehow devalued. There must be an eventual there. So the question before us now is, what is it? Is nirvana a something or a nothing? The best way to untangle this knot is through the famous exchange between Sariputta and Udayi. Here, Sariputta begins by saying, nirvana is bliss. But Venerable Udayi challenges him. How can it be bliss if nothing is felt? The key comes in Sariputta's response to Venerable Udayi. The fact that nothing is felt is precisely what's blissful about it. That is, we think of happiness as adding good feelings to our lives, more pleasure, more joy, more and more. But Sariputta, and by extension the Buddha, understands ultimate happiness as the subtraction of pain, of stress, of agitation. How can this be understood? Well, let's take an analogy. Imagine that it's summertime and there's a loud humming air conditioner unit in your window. If you've been living in that room for a while, you may not notice the noise at all. It's just ever-present background noise. And this is something I can personally remember from living in a small apartment in New York during the summertime. But when the unit suddenly shuts off, the silence that follows, you notice. And it's not something that you've added to the space. Instead, it's simply the absence of noise. But that absence feels overwhelmingly peaceful all of a sudden. And this is perhaps the kind of bliss of nirvana that Sariputta is pointing to. It's the relief of the ending of noise, internal noise, let's say. The relief of the burden being put down and being gotten rid of once and for all. Now, ultimately, the Buddha refused to pin this down completely. He classified the state of the enlightened being after death as one of the unanswered questions. Why is that? Because he says if he said that they existed in nirvana in some sense, that would lead to clinging to the state as to some kind of eternal heaven, which would lead to notions of eternalism. On the other hand, if the Buddha said that such a person didn't exist at all, we would then fear that kind of death as a kind of complete annihilation of the self. Our language of existence and non-existence frankly applies to conditioned things, things that arise and pass away. But the concept we have of nirvana is of something that steps outside of this duality entirely. It's simply freedom from the burning fires. Now, indeed, one of the most common names for this state is the unconditioned.